Hey there, model builders. This is Mike with Aristotle's Miniatures. Today I wanted to talk to you about working with 3D printed parts. Those of you that follow my page know I try really hard to stay away from actually manufacturing, but every once in a while someone will talk me into sending them some 3D printed parts, and there's a lot of other resources out there that you can buy upgrade parts from that have been 3D printed, particularly with these liquid resin printers. Now, dealing with these parts is something that a lot of people are just learning how to do and become familiar with, and I thought it would be beneficial to show people what's involved. I know there's people out there that will charge extra to remove the supports, and it might seem like kind of a cheap way to make money, or not cheap so much as easy, but I want to show how tedious this process can be, and maybe it's worth it for you to pay for that if you're getting your parts from someone that does that. Or the flip side is I'd like to show you how you can do it yourself if you'd like to save some money or just get better at dealing with 3D printed parts. So I've got all my tools laid up for this first step here. I printed these parts yesterday, and I've done the initial rinse in the isopropyl alcohol or IPA bath, but there's still a little bit of leftover resin and the supports are still on. So we're going to go through taking these lightly processed parts and bringing them up to the point where they're ready to be painted and incorporated into your model. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got these nitrile gloves that I'm going to put on. This liquid resin is nasty stuff. Now, I have not had any serious reaction with this stuff, but I've seen the pictures of people who have reacted to it, and it's just not worth chancing. It's not pleasant stuff. Now, I've got two of these bins that I keep filled with isopropyl alcohol. One of them is my initial bath, and that's what I did yesterday. This one is my cleaner IPA, if you will, and I'm going to use these for this next step. Now, I've got three different parts here we're going to be looking at. This first one is from the MiG-23 that I just recently started working on. We created a new fuselage, a new nose section of the fuselage to incorporate on that Minicraft MiG-23 model to help really add some detail and accuracy to it. So the camera's not wanting to focus on there. Let's see. Yeah, I'll have to rely on some photos to show it off. Another piece we've got is this exhaust outlet for that same MiG-23 that we're going to build, and there's all kinds of detail worked on, even on the inside of that can there. There we go. And I like to try to keep these exhaust outlets open at the base, so if you ever want to incorporate lighting into your build, you can backlight those engines and show off some of the detail. And then the last piece is this drag rudder from my B35 build. And each of these parts I wanted to pick for a couple different reasons to show how you can tweak your post-processing depending on what your plans are for the piece. So we'll start with this nose section for the MiG-23. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the toothbrush and I'm going to submerge this in the IPA over here. So we're just going to real lightly scrub. You'll see sometimes when you get these 3D printed parts that they'll have like these spots where there's a little bit of a sheen to them, and that's some pooled uncured resin that's just kind of clinging and it's being stubborn to get rid of. And you can throw that in the sunlight and cure it, but if you got kind of a blob or it's somewhere you don't want it, what you're going to end up doing is curing something that you're going to end up having to sand out at a later point. So we've done our scrubbing, and I'm going to shake that off And we're just going to set that off to the side and let it air dry. Nice thing is that IPA evaporates faster than if you were dealing with a water bath. So next up we'll get this engine, and this one's going to be tough because you can't really get down in there too well without the brush, but we want to do that gently. The wall thickness around the exhaust pedals is a 0.3 millimeters, so it's very delicate. So get that one scrubbed off, and then we'll do this drag rudder from the B35. Now I just want to get that initial bit off, and then again we'll set that to side to air dry. Now the next part is where you can kind of change up how you approach things. So these have gone through the printer. They've gone from a liquid form printed out into these pieces to be used on the model, but they're not completely cured. They're still soft. They're very easy to scratch if you bump them with something hard, but they retain their shape. So the next step is to cure them, but you don't want to cure them until you've removed at least some of those supports. Now, I say some of them, you got to kind of tailor your approach. So this piece, for example, I'm probably going to go through and remove pretty much all of the supports, because before I apply paint to this, we're going to incorporate it back here onto the actual plastic model. So all the supports can come off. Now, a piece like this, depending on how you're painting your B35, you may or may not want to take all the supports off. These supports actually are great little structures to use when painting, and this exhaust can is another example. So I'm going to remove all the supports around the pedals and some of the ones around the base, but I'm going to leave some because that's a perfect little stand to throw on some tape for when I'm going to paint the exhaust can and that rudder. So what we'll do is we'll start with this piece. Now I've got my nippers that came with a 3D printer. You can get these nice side cutters from different hobby sources. I'm sure they've got them on Amazon. And I'm going to try and cut as close to the model as I can. Now it doesn't necessarily need to be perfect, and I will tell you that when I'm supporting my models for printing, I try very hard to think about, as I'm designing the model, how I'm going to orient this when I print it to minimize the impact of the supports. So the bulk of the supports for this piece you can see are at the base of the piece, and that's going to be getting sanded flush to be incorporated onto the model. So I'm not worried about losing any detail or interfering with surfaces. Now, I did have to come up though, and with this being a longer piece, I like to have some supports up the side just to maintain the correct angles as it prints out, fighting those peeling forces. So I had to put a couple supports on the visible surfaces of the model. But what I tried to do, I'll use my tweezers to point these out. You can see places like here on the side, that's actually detail, here and here and here on the nose cone where I snipped those off. Now, I try to put those supports places that are very easy to correct. So what we'll do is we'll finish clearing all these supports off. And once we're satisfied with that initial cleanup, we're going to take these parts out and we're going to set them in the sun. Now you can buy a UV light. There's curing stations that you can get to go with your 3D printer if you're printing yourself. I've found the sun to be a pretty effective tool, and it's not too expensive to use that one. So like these supports here around the cockpit, I tried to place them places where they're not going to damage a surface with detail. So you can clip them off, you can do a little sanding. I probably won't use my X-Acto, but I wanted to bring that along just to show sometimes that's a great way to just shave it flush as you're working on it. So, and I like to work from the top down and the outside in to remove these supports. And that should be just about everything around the cockpit. So you can just kind of peel those back once they're separated from the model and break them off, and we can set those off to the side. So as we free it up, you can see there's a few pock marks, but that's all areas that's not going to be too hard to address with a sanding stick or an X-Acto. We'll just keep working our way down this fuselage section. So we've gone ahead and removed the supports from these 3 pieces. Now, we're gonna go ahead and do one more scrub in the IPA, and the reason is it's easiest to see here on this piece. You can see those shiny bits, and that's where there's some leftover kind of diluted resin, and we want to get that kind of scrubbed out. And now that that cluster of supports is out of the way, we can get in there and clean them off a little better. So we're gonna do another real quick scrub in the IPA with the toothbrush. I'm just being real careful what details you're scrubbing too hard. There's a pitot tube on this MiG-23 nose that is going to be miraculous if it survives the whole model building process, but it's there if you can do it. All right, so we're done with the IPA for now. Well, for these pieces, anyways. The next step is a technique I have come to like doing to clean these pieces up. So this flap is a perfect example. You can dive in with an X-Acto or some sanding sticks, and you can start working on these pieces right now. The problem is that I have found it's not cured yet. So it's still soft, it's still pliable. You could see when I was taking the supports off that I was bending some of them, and there's a lot of give to them when they're not fully cured. So my concern when I start sanding or trying to scrape with an X-Acto is it's very easy to damage the surface. And there's some very fine panel detailing on these flaps, not to mention they're exceptionally thin. Or when you're looking at this MiG-23 piece where we've got the supports on that one side, there's panel detailing incorporated into the surface of this model, and it's very easy to damage that if it's not hard. So what I like to do is I like to now take these parts and set them in the sun and let them cure and get nice and solid before we dig back in to do our model work. So we're gonna go plop these guys in the sun, and we'll be back to dig back in. All right, builders, we're back at the workbench. Parts are in from outside, finished curing, gloves are off, and we can finish up this post-processing. Now you can see a couple places where there's still some of that shiny bit that just stubborn and didn't want to come off. I'm not going to do it in this video, but what you can do is you can grab a cotton bud or Q-tip here and dip it in some isopropyl alcohol and just wipe it off real quick. You want to add that IPA in, otherwise the cotton will snag to the residue and you'll just end up getting cotton fluff stuck on your model piece. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our sanding sticks and our X-Acto knife and finish these pieces up. Now, the exhaust nozzle, we're going to set that aside because this is done. As it sits now, I'm ready to start painting this for incorporation into the model. The major supports are cut off. I might do just a tiny bit of touch-up sanding here, dry fitting on the model, but otherwise it's ready to be painted. This portion back here is going to be tucked deep inside the model where you're not going to see it. So we can set that over there. These drag flaps. Now, these are a great example of why I do post-processing the way I do. We'll finish that snip right there. These support marks along the side here, if I were to sand these off, I'm in danger of losing this recessed detail here and here. Now, I typically do my panel lines anywhere between 0.15 and 0.2 millimeters recessed, just depending on how much room I've got to work with, the thickness and whatnot. So I'm pretty confident these are 0.15 recessed here, just because of how thin this part is. So you sand that when it's soft, you're going to lose the detail, but you don't have to worry about that as much after you've cured it. So I'm going to take my sanding stick and just lightly level this section out. Now it's going to take a little longer to sand because we cured it, and it no longer has that pliability that we got to see earlier. But that's what's going to help retain that detail, is losing that pliability and adding some hardness to the material. So I'm not going to go through and perfect these. I'm just showing a technique. But as you can see, those marks are sanded down, but the panel detailing is left, so you can see where the dust is gathered in those, and you can go back with just some water and a soft brush and clean that out, and it cleans out very nicely. So you can do that to both sides, and you're going to get a real sharp finish that doesn't lose any of the detail. Now, that's made easier because it's a nice flat surface. Things get a little more complex dealing with a piece like this. Now, the cockpit area, I'm probably just gonna go in and take a good enough type approach, because there's gonna be a windscreen that goes over top of this. So I need it flush enough that will set down on there. But I don't need that perfectly smooth surface. At least to my taste, I don't. So we got those cleared out. And a little bit more there. And a little more forgiveness with this being cured. Now, the other pieces, this mark here and the other three on the nose cone, I'm probably going to follow up with the sanding stick, just like we did with the drag rudders for that B35. Now you use a nice fine grit sanding stick, and when you paint this up, you're not going to know that there were supports there, which is really the goal here. You don't want to sand flat on it and get a flat spot, so just keep working it around, work with the curve. Just having that cured surface, to me, helps this process be a little less risky for damaging your model. So that's pretty well cleaned up. I'll probably hit it again with some finer sanding sticks and make sure it's perfectly smooth. And then with this section right here, I'm just going to gently work it from the top. And then I'm not having to interfere with those gear doors at all. Now at the back of it, I will probably sand it down just a little bit and get more of a smooth surface on the back. And I'll take some fine sandpaper on a metal plate, so I'm making sure I keep that perfectly flat surface. But I'm not going to get it perfect because I like having that extra surface area when I'm joining parts. So I hope this was beneficial to you out there. For those of you thinking about trying 3D printed parts from a maker, it's not hard to do. You just got to take your time. And for others of you, maybe this showed why your maker charges to remove the supports, and why I think they're probably justified in doing so. All right, well, take care, and again, I hope this was beneficial.